but I will give a brief intro about myself. I live in Kalkbay. I have a garden here. We've been here 3.5 years, and I've been, well, we planted the food forest here 2 years ago. And I'm a permaculture designer and practitioner, and I run a business called Leaf and Stone, which is quite broad. It's kind of off-grid sustainable solutions in quite a broad sense. So here we have an eco home, so we have a biodigester, we have grey water wetland. The whole renovation was based on ecological and environmentally sustainable solutions, from the wood we used and how we sourced it, and having a small impact as we could with materials. And so I do natural swimming pools, and I do garden designs, edible gardens, ecological gardens, and water solutions, off-grid water solutions, from kind of dealing with grey water and harvesting rainwater. And you can see all of that on my website. But I guess gardening and food forests are my greatest passion. So it's quite a privilege to be able to talk about biochar, because there's very few things that one can, I can't talk to my friends about these things. They're just too nerdy. Not my friends, but the things I want to talk to them about. So I hope that you're interested in it. I had some questions. I mean, we can maybe do like show of hands, or if you want to leave a comment, but it was just trying to gauge like what people's general knowledge around these things are. And the first questions would be kind of around soil and understanding like how soil works. So like soil texture, like the difference between clay, silt, and sand. I'm assuming most of you kind of know the basics of that, and organic matter and how that works in soil. And maybe I'll go into it a little bit, because it's important for understanding biochar. Does anyone here, here's a question you can maybe answer. Does everyone here or anyone here know what cation exchange capacity is and what it means? Maybe just raise your hand if you do. Michelle, okay. So, and raise your hand if you know that soils have clay, silt, and sand, and that they impact the soil in different ways. Just generally how they, okay. So the main differences, I guess, that people are common with is you get loam, which is a mixture of clay, silt, and sand in the right proportions, which is great and everybody loves. And you get very sandy soil, very common in Cape Town, and you get very clay soils. So either of those have various challenges on either side. So where biochar comes in is as an amendment, which can help any soil actually. But it's important to understand, I guess, so maybe I'll just touch on clay. Like what's really great with clay is that it holds onto nutrients. So the cation exchange capacity is essentially, you get electrons and you get positive and you get negative charges, and they're kind of like glue, so they can stick together. This is if anyone here is a scientist or a chemist, forgive me because I'm not, but it's infinitely complex in terms of how far you want to get into it. But the basic idea is, positive and negative charges stick together, and with soil particles, clay has a lot of negative charges, and nutrients generally have positive charges, and they can stick to the clay, and they can hold on to all of the nutrients in the soil. That's why clay, or that's one of the real positive things of clay, is it holds a lot of nutrient, and it can exchange, and it can come up with a whole concoction of different chemical processes. Like has a lot of ability to exchange and move things around, and all these complex processes that take place can happen. Sand, on the other hand, is terrible. It has a very low capacity to hang on to things. It has very low negative charges. So nutrients just flush out from the soil. When you get heavy rains, they all just disappear. And generally what a lot of gardeners, and I'm sure most of you understand, is organic matter and compost, and especially humus, are amazing for doing that as well. The humus and organic matter can do the same thing. It can cling on to all of those nutrients. They don't flush away. So improving your soil just by composting and putting loads of organic matter into sandy soil, you can really improve soil. And when it comes to biochar, so what biochar is essentially is charcoal. It's wood or any kind of biomass that has been burnt with very low access to oxygen. It's called something called pyrolysis. So it burns and then it kind of retains its structure. And what that means is that you end up with, it can be little particles and it can almost be powdery, but on a very, very small scale, if you look at it under a microscope, it has all of these little vessels and tubes. The carbon structure of that wood, of the woody biomass, is retained, and you have huge surface area. I think you can get 1 gram of biochar will give you 500 square meters. To think about that, it's pretty insane. It's hard to get your head around. And what surface area means is biochar is incredibly hygroscopic. It kind of absorbs loads of water in all of those little tubes, and it also creates all of the surface area for microbiology, right? So they all, it's like a little hotel for them. They can climb in and they can cling and they can stick there. And so when you have biochar in soil, you're able to provide water retention, and you're able to provide an amazing habitat for soil microbiology, which is going to obviously improve your soil. So it's important to understand that biochar has no, or practically very little, nutrient value of its own. It does, depending on how it's made, a bit like potash, you can have ash remnants in it, which is going to give you potassium. But it's not really an amendment that's going to add nutrients to the soil. It's going to improve soil structure. So it's generally very, very good for sandy soils because, as I was saying, sandy soils have absolutely no ability to retain, well, very little ability to retain and glue nutrients. So you can improve the cation exchange capacity of sandy soil by adding biochar to it. And then it just means that whatever you're adding to your soil has a little bit more of an ability to stick there and hang around rather than just getting rinsed out. It's important to note that it's also that biochar is also good for clay soils, but in quite different ways. Where clay soils really struggle to get aeration and to drain water, biochar can improve that because it's so porous. When you add it to clay, it kind of creates, well, I guess, pockets of air and improves the what's it called, the hydrological ability for water to move through it. I mean, is there, at that point, does anyone have any questions? Is that making sense? So when I started my garden, I added lots of biochar. I had very poor sandy soils here, and I immediately saw a huge improvement in water retention. The other thing to note with biochar is that if you Google it and research it, there's a lot of there is some negative press on it, and there are people who are not convinced. But by and large, overwhelmingly, the research shows that it's very positive. And it's been heavily researched in the last 10 years. There's a lot of research around, its ability to put carbon in the soil. So there's an impact there for climate change. But it also is widely contested because it gets very technical. What you don't want is people making huge monocrops to produce loads of biochar, which will be counterproductive. And also when you start putting loads of it into the soil, it can increase oxidation, which can start sucking oxygen, and it can affect like the ability for microbiology and humus to access oxygen, and it can have negative effects. But by and large, 80% of what you come across is really, really positive, and definitely on plant growth. It's kind of, at this point, it's starting to be kind of accepted that it massively benefits plant growth. And I think it's one of those things that's always contextual. It's not just like so many things with gardening, it depends. It's not just, well, in every context, you must throw it in the soil and it will be good. There's always conditions to say, in this condition, yes, it really will benefit you, but maybe there's some circumstances where it won't. And also it's important to understand that not all biochar is created equal. Some of it can be made really well. It depends how it's burnt, what it's made from, and some of it can be quite poor. So you can make biochar at home. I can post links after this on how to do it, and you can buy it. I used to get it from Namchar, and I used to advocate for that. I know Anya and I got a lot of biochar. I still have some, and I kind of advocated getting that from Namchar. And Anya, I've kind of since changed that. That's quite recently, in the last 2 months, because a friend of mine who does a lot of work in Namibia kind of said to me, she's not convinced that that Namchar are very responsible or sustainable in terms of how they produce that. And I looked into it, and it did seem to be pretty dodgy. They claim that they use a lot of alien wood, but they actually deforest large tracts of bush and vegetation in Namibia, and how they kind of pay people who bring them vegetation, and they don't pay them very well. And what it means is you have like these areas that aren't being responsibly managed, because people who or anyone really can just bring them like biomass. So it's kind of set up this industry that's not very responsible. There's some links on that as well, which is sad, because you could get it very cheaply on a large scale if you went to the Namchar factory, and you could just fill up a huge truckload of what is essentially waste for them. It's all of the powder that's left over from when they make the charcoal, which is a waste product. There might still be some instances when you need large applications, and they're kind of throwing it away anyway. It's just one of those things that can get quite complicated. There's a company called Eden Biochar who make biochar, and they make it responsibly. They use alien vegetation that they clear, and that they produce biochar from. And they inoculate that as well, which I'll explain why that's necessary. And I'll also post links to them. So the other thing with biochar is that it needs to be, before you use it, it needs to be inoculated or activated with nutrients and with microbiology, essentially. If you throw it straight into your soil and you mix it in, what will happen is that it'll tie up and lock up all of the nutrients that are currently in the soil. And then for a year or two, you'll have really poor results because there won't be any nutrients that are accessible. And then going forward, you will see improvement. So if you're working on a huge tract of land, that might be an option for you. To plow it into the soil essentially, and leave the soil for a year or two with cover crops, and then start growing after that. But in smaller gardens, what you can do is either add it to your compost as you compost, or you can make worm tea and throw it in worm tea. And essentially what you're doing there is you're just charging it before you're putting it in the soil. So if you put it in a huge batch of worm tea, all of that microbiology is going to go cling and find homes and form biofilm inside all that 500 square meters of surface area. If you think of biofilm, that kind of sludgy film that you get in your shower or in other places where bacteria like to live, for your beneficial bacteria, that 500 square meters in that 1 gram of biochar, imagine that, it's this amazing habitat for them. So if you put it in your worm tea, you're going to get loads of beneficial bacteria in there, and also you're going to get loads of nutrients, and then you're going to put it in your soil, and then you won't have the problem where it's tying up all of those nutrients. And what I did when I started my garden is I made a huge compost heap. I had manure, chicken manure, I had compost that I'd made and compost that I'd bought, because I chopped down 1 or 2 trees, so we had all these wood chips and green biomass mixed in there, and I had like a mountain of biochar as well, and I mixed it all. The general rule of thumb is 50-50, so 1 to 1, and then I left that for like 2 months, and then I worked that into the soil. I can actually, maybe it's time to do a screen share. Okay, let me do this. So I'm just sharing my screen, and just let me know. Can you see the photo in front of you? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see the photo. See that? Okay, cool. So you can see there, this is when we started mixing it in. I drew every block there is a square meter, and there's a little pile of biochar and compost mixture that I made. This was the huge pile. It's now been reduced somewhat. You can see all the little piles. Yeah. And if you're interested in application rates and things, I've got some information and links that I can send to you afterwards, so don't stress too much about that now. In hindsight, I would have actually added more, but and there's another huge pile there. Another great way to work with it is by putting it in your compost, because not only is it a great way of charging it and getting it into the soil, but it actually improves the whole composting process, like significantly. It's quite amazing what it does. Every part of your composting will be improved. The retention will be improved. The exchange rates of all of the chemical processes and access to oxygen is improved, aeration is improved. So you end up with amazing compost. So what I do is I just have a big bucket of it next to my compost, and whenever I add a layer, because I kind of just compost quite slowly as I go, as most people do. if you do like a hot composting and you want to build a square cube of compost, then it's great. You just layer your biochar in with your green and your brown. And as I said, you can go up to like 50% compost, 50% biochar. So you can put quite a lot in. It's a great way to compost. And that will get it into your soil. So if you're doing no dig and you already have an established garden, then you can add it to your compost and add that to the garden, and it will get incorporated by worms into your soil. If you, like I did, if you're starting a garden from scratch and the soil's pretty poor, so you're not trying to preserve the existing soil food web that's there, you can dig it in / plow it in, which is great because then you can really get it into the topsoil like I've done here. So does anyone have any questions? Which you can either maybe raise your hand.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
I think Roxanne asked the same question about how long it needs to be in the compost or the worm tea to inoculate it.
I'd say about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Worm tea probably faster. Compost 2 weeks. Worm tea you could almost be like a few days.
Okay. And would that be an aerated worm tea or just normal, if you make a tea bag and soak your worm castings kind of worm tea?
Definitely aerated worm tea, because what you're wanting is lots of microbiological inoculation. So a worm tea that's not aerated will generally be actually what they call like a leachate rather than a tea.
Yeah.
It'll have nutrients, but it won't actually have a very high number of beneficial bacteria. So if you aerate it, you're going to get millions of beneficial bacteria multiplying your molasses and that whole process. I'm not sure how much you guys know about that, but if you don't, then look into it. Aerated compost tea. So you want millions and millions of beneficial bacteria, and then inoculate it, because then the biochar will absorb a lot of that.
And then how is this different from ash from the fire, which I know a lot of us use?
So ash from the fire, it's kind of broken down to the point where you no longer have the carbon structure that is retained. Let me see if I can get a nice picture here for you. Okay, can you see that? So that kind of honeycomb structure is what's left over when it's burnt under pyrolysis. So it's carbon structure of the plant, the cell structure is retained. When you burn something to ash, it's kind of destroyed and broken down. So that's the main difference. So ash will have, when you're adding ash, you're adding loads of potassium. It's kind of potash, and obviously whatever other minerals and nutrients were in that biomass. So adding ash that's a kind of nutrient additive to the soil, where biochar, as I said, might have some ash in it and some nutrients, but very few, and it's more of a soil amendment to the structure of the soil, rather.
I've got a question about the size. You mentioned that it's like the dust that's available, for example, from Namchar. They're selling presumably the sort of nicer big pieces and just give you sell you the small. I'm just wondering what size. Like if you were to go and buy like a bag of charcoal, what you know, how would that work?
Mm. So the size, the charcoal is much too big. The size you get from Namchar is almost like a powder. And you must remember that like this is so small here that even powder will have some, you know, each little grain of powder will have this huge surface area. Generally like a mix of quite fine, it depends on the soil as well. Clay, you want like a finer grit. And then generally a kind of mixed grit is quite good, having powdery pieces and then little, small little pieces, kind of the size of lentils, would be quite good as well. But in sand, you generally want finer, and then clay, you want more gritty, chunkier pieces. But I think that from what I've read as well, it can, I mean, these things can get very complex in terms of the exact makeup of the soil, the pH of the soil, and a whole factor of variables that might determine these things. But also with a lot of these things, you can get too complicated and too scientific as well. But I hope that generally answers your question. You'll see if you make biochar at home, you'll want to kind of grind it up and crush it up a bit, because you'll end up with like little pieces that are like golf ball size or marble size, and you kind of put them in a sack and then jump on them or crush them down into a powder. The process when it's made at home is you make a pit, like a cone, like that, and you put loads of wood in the middle, and you start a fire and you pile it up and you pile it up and you pile it up and you pile this cone up so it's super hot, and it can't access air because it's in a cone very easily, but it's super hot, so it keeps burning. Where normally a fire would be drawing air in from underneath. So you make a very hot fire, you add lots and lots and lots of mass, and then once it's kind of built up, you put it out with a hose. So you kill it and you stop the process, because if you leave it, it'll kind of all smolder and mostly turn to ash. You put it out with a hose and then you come back the next day and that's your biochar. And that's a very, very simplified, but that's the general idea if you wanted to make it. So if you're clearing a whole lot of brush and you have space on your property, you can do that. It's the most sustainable and responsible way to do it, and cheapest way to do it. Because you'll see, I'll send a link to Eden Biochar, but they sell, I think, like a 3-liter bag for 65 Rand. But they do inoculate it as well with worm tea and compost. And you actually, I mean, they claim that, that's like one bag is enough for one fruit tree, for instance. So it does go quite far. But then if you're wanting to start a whole food forest and put biochar in very sandy soil, that's obviously going to get very expensive to use a lot of that.
Can I just ask about the biochar that you put into this pit? Is it all dry material?
Yeah.
You can't, it has to, you're not going to chop your tree and then put those leaves and sticks and wet. It has to be first sort of dried out before because it's not going to burn otherwise.
Yeah, stuff that would generally make a good fire, and stuff that's going to be quite woody. So you wouldn't want to put leaves in there. I mean, if you feel that the fire is going to burn and there are some leaves on there, that it's not going to be the end of the world, but it's not going to benefit the process. Yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Any other questions? So I promised a bit of a garden tour, and I'm going to do it mostly with photos, because the garden's not looking great in the middle of winter and it's kind of gloomy outside, and also I didn't think that walking around, I'm not sure how you normally do it, but walking around with a phone, I'm happy to do it if people want, but I kind of felt taking you through photos would be a good place to start, and maybe you'd get more from it. How does everyone feel about that? Good?
Yeah, we haven't actually done a virtual garden tour yet, have we? We haven't. Nobody's been brave enough to try the walk around the garden with a video.
Okay, so there's no precedent that's been set. Okay.
No pressure.
So I've got. What's this? Can you see this? Might make a bit more sense in a while. So just bear with me.
Have you got a friend with a drone? How did you get these aerial?
Yeah, I've got a friend who lives next door with a drone, actually, and we started shooting some stuff for a little video a few weeks ago. I've got these drone shots, which is very cool. So this is the design. And I'll just take this clip here. So you can see we're in Kalkbay, right up in the corner, like near the neck. As you go up from Olympia and you turn up into Boys Drive, it's right up in the corner there. And the property, I'll show you here. Doesn't really make sense. It's kind of in this little nook behind. It's protected from the southeaster over here from this big house. So that's the southeaster coming in there. And it gets quite a lot of, and it's kind of north facing, this garden. So it's on its side now, but it's actually, that's north over there. And it's about 165 square meters. And I've got about 18 or 19 fruit trees planted here. Take you back to, so you can see here, this is the little space here. It's like a little wedge, like a little V. Here's another picture. And this is kind of what we started with initially. There was a lot of driveway here, and this funny little garden, these two trees, which we eventually decided to cut down because they were blocking light. And then we removed a whole section of the driveway here just to make a bit more space. Come back to that. And then you can see here the drive, this has been filled in here and expanded. And kind of mapped out, and it's on a slight incline here, so mapped out contours, so everything's planted along contour here. There is a grey water, there's a biodigester in the ground, which receives all of our sewage and gives us cooking gas in the kitchen. This is a kind of pre-made, it's like the size of a 3,000 litre tank. It's buried underground, and the existing sewer line goes in there, comes out there. What I actually have in here now is I pump that. This is a grey, well, it's a constructed wetland. You can see there, that's the wetland that's been planted. How it works now, let me show you. Sorry if I'm jumping around a bit. It'll all make sense soon. Yeah. So this is the garden as it looks now. That biodigester you were just looking at is under the ground over here. And that is the wetland over there. So I have a pump in here that pumps the effluent that's left over from the biodigester through this wetland, which cleans most of it. And then some of it goes to these bananas and some of it goes, it drains out to all of the fruit trees, feeding them. It's an amazing source of fertilizer. And all of our grey water just goes into this banana circle here. There's bananas and papayas here. And if you look at the plan, so that's the house here. That's where the biodigester is. It goes through that wetland and then runs into the garden, and that's the banana circle there. So now, this is a good before picture here as well. You can see that's the start of the banana circle. So this was almost exactly 2 years ago now. And that's the wetland there, just in its infancy. And this is all the earthworks finished, but nothing planted yet over here. That was the picture I showed you earlier. So this is when we were digging in all of the amendments. This was our planting day. So here we've got everything planted. All the fruit trees, and the bananas, it's planted. And that's after just a few months, everything's getting established. So this path here is what you can see over here. It's a kind of mini swale. So we've got rainwater tanks and we've got borehole water. And all of the overflow from all the stormwater overflow from the house and from the water tanks runs via pipes, perforated pipes, and drains into this, and the whole thing's filled with rubble and then topped off with kind of geoliner and then wood chips on the top. So it looks just like a normal path. You can see there. But we have a huge amount of water that's running into the garden there. I'm just going to check. If anyone, will you just put audio on and speak to me because I'm struggling to get all the windows to show at the right times. So I can't actually see the chat window. Trying to get it to show up now. Where's the chat window?
Andrew, I mean, I suppose you're not finished yet, so I don't know when you want the questions. But
yeah,
I just
absolutely. I'm just
amazing to see. I'm really enjoying it. So I know you sort of probably feel you're in a vacuum there, but I'm certainly really enjoying this. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, path, for example, is it on contour then, or maybe slightly off contour?
It is on contour. So if you look at the this design here, and these red lines here are all contour lines. So it's not extremely steep. It's only about, from the end of the garden here, which is where the driveway starts, to the top here is probably only about 1.5 meters, but it's significant enough. So all of these, you can see along these contour lines, we've got avocado here, we've got a mango here, I've got this is a macadamia, This is a plum. This is a nachi. This is an apple here. I've got 2 almonds. This is an orange. I've got a peach here, and I've got a pomegranate here. And then I've got some espalier over here growing along the wall. I'll go back to the photos just to maybe bring this into context a bit.
It's like you have so much in such a small space, but you actually managed to fit it all in.
Yeah, it all. I mean, the trees are 3 meters apart in the rows, and then 4 meters apart across, which is generally your considered minimum spacing when you are pruning to keep them to size. You can see how nicely the banana circle's growing here. This was December 2019. So this was half a year ago. Let's zoom in a bit there.
Andy, what's I find it really interesting when people are growing so many. You've got such a range of fruit trees. What is performing the best? I know they're only 2 years in, but what at the moment do you think is performing the best?
So there are definitely some that I threw in just kind of out of pure curiosity, like the mango, which is tiny. You can see it there. It's hardly grown at all, which is not that unexpected. They only grow above 29 degrees Celsius. It is growing though, and also with trees, you never know. Sometimes they do nothing for 2 or 3 years, and then they kind of eventually come around. The avo tree is done the best. It's quite huge now. So, see if we can find a picture for you. Here's a good one.
Is it both avos that did well, or did one do better than the other?
One's doing better than the other. You can see there. So that's 2 years of growth. It was where this little cursor is. It was a tiny little tree, about as thick as my finger. And the other one you can't really see here that well. The other one's about half the size, but it doesn't get quite as much sunlight at the moment. And it was an interesting observation I made with this one. If I take you back to, say, here. Oh, okay, here, this is a good one. See this weird little square here? When I removed this, we had a whole lot of, this whole hedge that we cleared here. We had a whole lot of biomass and woody stuff. We literally buried it like underneath the soil here and then just covered it in soil. So it's kind of like a hugel bed in a way, but just because I just wanted to get it in the soil and get it out the way. And it's kind of directly underneath where that avo tree was. And I have since read a lot about submerged hugel beds that you generally would never make them under a tree, but you make them next to the tree. You dig like a meter trench down and you just bury tons and tons of logs and wood, especially in sandy soil. And it forms this reservoir of water and nutrients for like 5 years and shows amazing results. In hindsight, I would actually do that again if I started a garden like this in sandy soil, and I would recommend it to anyone else as a great way. So say otherwise you struggle even with biochar. So all the biochar I added and constant composting, I still lose nutrients because I test the soil twice a year, and you can see, it just especially the potassium. There's certain nutrients that leach out more easily than others. That leaches out. So my strategy at the moment is actually to make kelp tea, and I'm able to suck that into the irrigation and foliar feed like the whole garden with potassium and Epsom salts as well to get some magnesium in there. And you can see how it's been 2 years, and that's really what it takes for something to establish. But I imagine after 3 or 4 years of composting and biochar, a big factor here is the building of humus in the soil in terms of retaining, long-term retaining nutrients as well. That will really start to kick in, and I think I'll see a huge improvement there. Yeah, so if anyone wants to ask a question at any stage, just kick in. I am trying to keep tabs of the chat thing as well, but it's probably better just to use audio because it's hard to keep everything on the screen at once.
I noticed that you've got chilies or something like that growing under those avocado trees. Have you got a lot of sort of smaller crops around the bases of your fruit trees?
Yeah, so I started off initially interplanting a lot of things. So you'll see if I take through. So there's the chilies there. So the general concept with the food forest, for those who don't know, is mimicking an ecology and the processes of a forest in many ways at different levels. So you have fruit trees, and then you have shrubs, which can be berries, and you have beneficial plants like nitrogen fixing plants or comfrey, those that attract beneficial predators, lots of companion planting. And I had lots of, to answer your question, I had lots of veggies. So you can see here, some of these are, there's comfrey there, and there's onions there, and there's flowers. There's a better picture actually you can see here.
Eventually you will have no more space for those kinds of annuals once all your trees are big.
Exactly. So the idea of ecological succession, where you're moving through, if you disturb soil, initially you would have a whole lot of weeds come up, and annuals are essentially weeds. Anything, that is short-lived. So you can grow a lot of those initially in the first year, and then as it matures and you get more of a canopy, I'll stop doing that less and less. There's still a lot that you can grow, especially in summer. You can grow brassicas under trees, because I have the one large tree that was here that you probably saw, that wild olive. It's in there. This one here.
You keep the wild.
I kept that, yeah. And you can grow in the height of summer. You can grow carrots and brassicas because it's quite cool down there under the canopy quite nicely. I've had good success with that. But things that are vulnerable and it's not very economical to grow, lots of spinach or beetroot or in and among spaces, because you kind of forget where they are. And but things like cauliflower, for instance, are great because they take long and they need a bit of space, and they work quite nicely under the canopy of the trees. Here's one growing in amongst everything else. This is the soil, by the way. You can see down here the native soil, very sandy and brown, and you can see it never translates as well in a photo, but you can see here that's about 20 centimeters, really dark, lots of organic matter, great improvement there. I think, just let me check, there might be somebody else. Okay. Take you through, yes. So a lot of the fruit trees are planted with guilds, which is kind of the same concepts I was explaining earlier, where you have comfrey planted around them, flowers, nitrogen fixers. So the nitrogen fixers I have are, it's called Tagasusti. It's difficult for me to know whether I'm going into too much detail or not. But the nitrogen fixers are planted kind of everywhere, and they continuously feed the soil. I'm trying to find an example of one. Anyway, maybe I'll just go through sequentially here. That's the house before we started as well. And that's after.
Yeah.
This is,
Beautiful.
and this was on April 2019, so this is about a year's growth. You can see the peach tree growing nicely there. Someone asked earlier which trees did really well, so I went on a bit of a tangent there, but the avo done incredibly well. The peaches are very happy. The peaches and the almonds, obviously very similar. The apples are a bit of a stretch as well because it doesn't really get cold enough. I got very low chill varieties. The best ones I could find. It was a Fuji and a Granny Smith for those who are interested. They are moderately happy. Time will tell whether they fruit. Probably won't be enough cold hours for them to fruit significantly, but I'm sure we will get some apples. The macadamia was very slow at first, but is now taking off quite nicely. The citrus, the nachi is really unhappy. It got scale and it's always been tiny, and I think they really struggled from the lack of potassium that I was alluding to earlier. So I'm hoping that now I'm doing that kelp tea, that in the next growing season that will make a huge difference. I think they generally, citrus can really struggle in sandy soils for that reason. The potassium and the magnesium, they often need to be supplemented. The pomegranate's done really well. Yeah, there's someone.
Hi, sorry. You say you test your soil. Do you send it away, or
I send it away and get a test. And yeah, what are they called? BEM labs. I'll do a soil test.
Okay. And you do that twice a year?
Yeah. It's
okay.
So with soil testing, there's often this idea that, you test the soil and then you can, you see what's missing and then you put it in the soil and then you kind of done to a degree. And there's this whole idea of balance, getting the right ratio and balance of nutrients. I found in very sandy soil, it's actually it all just disappears so quickly. You just have to keep adding it. But it's been interesting to see how the organic matter has increased. It also tells you what I was talking earlier about the cation exchange capacity. That's increased. So you can see improvement there. And if you had a good loam soil with clay in it, the tests are far more useful because you can have far more control of, if you amend the soil with, if you can see that you have no boron or no magnesium, you can add it and you know that it's probably going to stay there for a while. Especially if you're doing a system where, like this, a permaculture system where you're cycling nutrients within the system. You're using nitrogen fixes, you're using cut and drop. So, a lot of the comfrey here, I almost see comfrey as a sponge. So it's catching nutrients. It's got such long, and then if you're continuously cutting it and throwing on the surface, it's creating like a little feedback loop where it's constantly catching nutrients that might be getting away and then throwing them back to the top. So planting lots of them in sandy soil is great for that.
Sorry, and one more question. That's what did you say it was? A cation? What?
What was that nice? Cation exchange capacity. So it's CEC.
Can I ask quickly what?
Sorry, just say that again. I think you were cut off.
Just going to ask you what varieties your avo trees are out of interest.
It's a Forte and a Haas.
And which one was the one that did so well?
Let me check.
Because I have the same two varieties, and my Forte has gone massive, and the Haas has hardly grown. So I was interested. It looks like your Haas did well, and your looks
Yeah.
like.
You know what? I'm trying to remember now. I think they're the same. I think
Okay.
I think they're both Fuerte. I think because this design was different, I was trying to get them, and then at the time, the only ones I could get were the same. So they're actually the same,
Okay.
and they are Fuerte.
Okay.
Do you say your one? Which one hasn't done well?
The house, they're in different positions. The house is in more shade, I think.
Yeah.
But it's also been there for longer and it's hardly grown. The Fuerte just rocketed, and it also needs a lot more water. It's growing so fast. If I don't actively water it, it literally wilts like a house plant. It's crazy. Whereas the other one has hardly done a thing. It just stands there looking happy, but not really going anywhere.
Interesting.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is stuff from the movie that we were doing. Dark there. It's kind of a nice illustration.
Did you study something to have all this knowledge, or have you self-taught?
Self-taught mostly. I mean, I did like a PDC, a permaculture PDC with Alex and Tahir about 5 years ago, I think. And then all just self-taught. Aerial shot. That was one of the before pictures. So you can see here the brassicas growing nicely under the tree. This was in summer. We had loads of pawpaws from our pawpaw and banana circle.
Andy,
That
are you
2 years old?
Hey? What was that?
Just remarking how huge that pawpaw looked. Is it only 2 years old?
Yeah, it
The
actually,
tree itself.
yeah, it only, after a year, it was kind of overhead and gave fruit. It was amazing. And now it's on its second crop. Against the
Andy,
wall here.
are you intending to prune the trees really strictly when they get bigger?
Yeah, so I already have been doing quite a lot of pruning. And you can see, this is against the wall, there's espalier. So there's a peach, that's an apple, and there's a fig. Sorry, I've got 2 figs. I didn't mention that either. I've got 2 figs, which are growing nicely. One of them is espalier. No, sorry, both of them are espalier, the ones on the other side. We're pruning them along this wall here.
Is that a south-facing wall?
It's kind of east facing, like yeah, kind of east, north, or northeast. That makes sense.
So morning sun.
Yeah. It loses a lot of sun, like as soon as the sun is overhead, and so like beyond kind of 12:30, it actually, this wall goes into shade. But they've still done very well. Been impressed. So in summer, you know, they get from like 8 in the morning till like 12:30. Not bad. So like 4.5 hours, like just enough. That's family. That's the bananas. We had our first crop of bananas. So for the first year, the banana trees did nothing. They didn't budge. And then they kind of rocketed the second summer. They only really grow in summer. They just pause in winter. In temperate climates, obviously. In tropical climates, they just grow throughout. And these are almost ready now, these bananas.
So they're fruiting now?
Yeah, weird, hey?
Yeah. And have you split any of your baby bananas and moved them? Not
yet. You can see there.
Okay.
Actually, I did move one of them. So I did move one of them. This, you can see it here, actually. But I'll start as soon as that one fruits, and then all of the others I think will fruit next summer, and then I'll start cutting them down. And there are some little pups coming up as well, smaller ones.
So you would cut the bigger ones down that have fruited and then leave the young ones to grow. You don't take the young ones away.
Yeah, well, if they get too many young ones, then I remove them.
Okay.
The rule of thumb, as they say, is 3. You have 3 generations: the mama, the daughter, and the granddaughter.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
any others you remove. It's kind of a bit more context. This is in March.
A layer of dry leaves because in the top has been on there. Maybe you can just take the spade up and just dig into the compost.
Yeah, it's almost done. Yeah, and that's the last picture. So I think that's pretty much it. Any other final questions?
Well, yeah, I just want to say it's really phenomenal, and you're really showing us how in quite a short amount of time you can completely change the fertility of a piece of land, and all this, the biochar, as you say, and the chop and drop, and the composting and everything. And I think I'm doing a lot of that as well, but I think you really speeded it up a lot more. And the big difference, I think, would be the biochar and the biodigester. So we're not doing that. And so I'd be really interested in hearing more about the biodigester, but maybe that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that might be a big key to what's happening for you there. Because we've also got the, the tegasastes and the comfrey and the compost, not the biochar. We're also pruning a lot, and we've got the diversity of plants, and the grey water. We bring a lot of water in to the swales in winter. We store our water in winter for summer. So we in summer we just sort of scrape through. Actually, we don't really have enough water to keep it really lush. But yeah, anyway, I'm just sort of comparing, because we planted, also with Alex and Tahir, permaculture sort of implementation in April and October 16 in 2 sort of successive plantings. So we sort of, 2 years longer. So I'm really watching with interest how your garden has developed in a much shorter time.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I'd love to come and see yours.
Yeah, it'd be great. We'll have to make a plan as soon as this whole COVID thing is moved along.
Surely we can start doing garden tours relatively soon. It seems like the lockdowns have lessened. If we're doing social distancing and all that, I'm sure it won't be too much longer.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about that. Some of us are quite high risk, so we're sort of being a bit more cautious. I'm also very keen to get going.
We definitely depend on everyone's personal risk factors, but it's all outdoors, so that's good.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that biochar thing. I think the digester. I think you're absolutely right, Jill. I think this probably does play a huge role, and it's great to see that you're getting gas to cook from with it. It's an incredible system. So
yeah, it is. It's very
well done. It's amazing what you've done. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
And it really looks like that piece of land had nothing going for it when you moved in there. It was just
it was just sand, really. Yes. I'll post on the WhatsApp group. I'll post a whole lot of links and references and things. Is that the best place to put it?
That's great, Andy. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been
welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
I think maybe we shouldn't keep you for much longer, because I know you've got kids waiting for you.
Yeah.
But I suspect you might be with questions on the WhatsApp group.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Send me questions, and I will. I'll get back to them. Yeah. on the WhatsApp group, that's fine, and